Hey, what's up? I got one viewer. Woo, it says one viewer. I don't know. We'll see. If you're a viewer, say hey. Don't be afraid. Do not be afraid. Be not afraid. Okay. Hello, peeps. I'm going to proceed as though it's just a video. And if anybody pops in and wants to ask questions, they can. And if not, I'll just treat it like a video. So, yeah. As the title says, Bryan Kohberger was quite the shedder. So I remember when I was deep diving into all this and I was a pro-burger. No, I was never a pro-burger, okay? I always wanted to make that clear. I was someone searching for the truth, and I was willing to give the defendant the benefit of the doubt and presume innocence until proven guilty. And it was a journey. It was an odyssey, actually. And that journey led me to, at the end there, before I just extracted myself, before he even pled guilty and confessed, and that was a confession, it led me to lean heavily into guilt. And I remember at the time all the people who had been following me because, early on I had, given them the benefit of the doubt and, picked the case apart, trying to understand the evidence, trying to understand law enforcement's narrative, and not having full information. And we didn't have full information because of the goddamn gag order, which was precipitated by Ann Taylor and the defense team, mind you. Let's not forget that. And I always resented them for that. Now, of course, Bill Thompson agreed to it readily, but it was Ann Taylor's idea. Ann Taylor's idea. And of course, we know now why that was, because their strategy all along, the defense's strategy, and don't tell me that Bryan Kohberger wasn't taking part in the strategy and agreeing to it. He was. We know now from the recent interviews that have been released related to his profs and colleagues that he is a control freak. He was an arrogant son of a bitch control freak, a know-it-all, wanted to control everything. And you can't tell me that he wasn't trying to do the same thing with his case with Ann Taylor. So I am certain that he had an incredible amount of influence in the strategy that they took. And the strategy that they took was, and I know a lot of people say, well, you can't blame him for that, you can't fault him. Okay, maybe not, but it's telling, right? Because it's precisely what a guilty person would do. Try to get all of the evidence against you thrown out, rather than trying to provide a rebuttal to all that evidence. You just try to get it all thrown out. And that's all they did. They tried to get it all thrown out in numerous ways. And then at the end, when they couldn't, they decided, you know what? Might as well plead guilty. And of course, according to BK, it's because he was tricked into pleading guilty even though he was innocent. I don't buy it. I don't buy it. We're going to cover this in another video because I got into it with Jules yesterday. Well, I didn't really get into it. She called me a dumbass and a dummy. And how could I be so dumb? Because I said that him pleading guilty was a confession, and it was. I mean, we could go look at the hearing again, where he enters his plea, and Hitler says, did you murder He lists off each defendant separately. Did you murder he said yes. He said yes to all of it. That's a confession too, folks. He pled guilty, which in and of itself, on the face of his confession, but then Hitler read each one off to him. Did you murder them? He said yes. That's a confession too. So Jules says to me, well, you can, plenty of people who are innocent plead guilty. You know what? Yes, some do. I'm not going to argue that. And that was not my argument. That would never be my argument. Some innocent people do plead guilty, but not to 4 life sentences and plead guilty to for a quadruple homicide. Nope. Try to find that one in the record. All right. No, they don't. Plenty of guilty people have accepted plea bargains, so they can get their sentence knocked down and not get the death penalty. In fact, there's not that many of them, I would say. I mean, let's go out and find some, guilty people. I mean, of course, they're going to claim they're innocent. So how do you really even know, guilty or innocent? The majority are going to be guilty. There was to Jules's point. You have a point, Jules, but you're comparing apples to oranges, okay? Not all crime is created equal. So a lot of these crimes that are just barely felonies or misdemeanors, not serious felonies. Serial Podcast did an excellent season on this about how if you're poor and dispossessed, you're often forced into pleading guilty because you just don't have the means to defend yourself, and the justice system just wants to churn through this, so they just turn to you pleading guilty and getting an incredibly reduced charge. Okay, and so many do that. Yes, so innocent people pleading guilty, but that's, misdemeanors and minor felonies. That's not this. That's not a quadruple murder. Few and far between. I don't know of any, so let's come up with some. Few and far between. Few and far between are those that plead guilty to a quadruple homicide and agree to a sentence of 4 life sentences concurrently. Or consecutively, I mean. Who's going to do that? A guilty person. That's what I think is going to do it. So, Jules, you're right, but you're wrong. You're comparing apples to oranges. Anyway, for those of you interested, we're going to get to the title in a second. Here is Lana. And Lana's going to have Chris Whitcomb on. And as Lana is wont to be, she's all agog, I guess, about having Chris Whitcomb on. This guy, I don't think there's anybody that could be too dark or malevolent for Lana, right? She loves them all. She loves them all. Because this guy, some people would say, their government propagandists would say this guy has a decorated past as a former FBI agent, special agent, sniper. I'd say he has a checkered past. Look at his history. Waco and Ruby Ridge. They were not 2 of America's proudest moments right there, folks. Not by a long shot. So I put on here, I said, will you ask him if he killed any children at Waco? Watch Waco, The Rules of Engagement, to get a sense of this guy's character. You don't want him in your corner if you're advocating innocence. But I can assure you that's no matter to these people, no matter whatsoever. And this will go ignored. Because at this space, I guess they consider me a troll too, just as they do at Jules's place, Jules's venue as well. Anyway, I'm belaboring this at this point. That is an excellent documentary, though, about Waco, so watch it. And I'm not defending David Koresh, but Waco was a cult just like Scientology is, and you don't see the government doing to Scientology what they did to the Branch Davidians in Waco. There was no need for this whatsoever. And that documentary reveals that. It was a despicable act. Under Bill Clinton, Janet Reno. I remember those days well. It was disgusting. It was a despicable act. I remember at the time thinking, why are they doing this? I mean, there are plenty of cults out there. There are plenty of, plenty of this to go around, and you're not doing this with those other cults. I mean, one could say the Church of Latter-day Saints is a cult. One could say really, any religion could be considered a cult. You're not doing that with them. Why are you doing it with the Branch Davidians? It was completely unnecessary. It was horrible. It was horrible what happened to those people. It didn't have to be. And this guy was front and center in that. Ruby Ridge, same thing. I'm not a white nationalist, and I'm not an apologist for the Aryans or the white nationalists, but Randy Weaver was minding his own business deep in the boonies. He wasn't bothering anybody. He and his family were living off the grid. They weren't bothering anybody. There was no reason to go there and effectively murder that family. No reason whatsoever. It was despicable. Absolutely despicable. So anyway, with that aside, back to the title. Bryan Kohberger was quite the shedder. Okay, so Bryan Kohberger, back when I was not a pro-burger, but when I was still giving him the benefit of the doubt, the defendant the benefit of the doubt, and analyzing the evidence from the little information that we had at the time, I took Howard Blum at his word that the DNA on the button snap of the sheath was only 20 skin cells, and that would be problematic. And I showed why that would be problematic, and it is, and it still would be to this day. Although technology has come a long way, and Othram is one of the companies that could certainly do that, I didn't believe, and I still believe that you couldn't get, the analysis they were able to get, two different type of DNA analysis, STR and SMP, from 20 skin cells. They couldn't have. Here's the thing. It wasn't 20 skin cells. And this is one of the things before I extracted myself from all this, and then shortly thereafter Bryan Kohberger pled guilty, that made me lean heavily towards guilt. This was one of them. The sample was much larger than Blum had divulged. So either Blum was lying, or his source severely misinformed him, one or the other. But not only was the sample not diminutive, it was prodigious, which indicates that it was more than likely, if not 100%, direct transfer by Bryan Kohberger. That combined with the fact that it was single source. It wasn't mixed with anybody else's DNA. Someone he may have touched, so their DNA's in there and his DNA's in there, was just his DNA. And I argued this both at Atlanta's venue yesterday and at Jules. I said the amount of skin cells on the button snap of the sheath was upward of 100,000 skin cells. And I got laughed out of town. They just laughed at it. They go, get out of there. That's a bunch of bull. But it's true, folks. It's true. Nobody is covering this part except for Viviana. Viviana has been a trooper. And Viviana, if you are not getting paid for this, you should be. I mean, she's been at it, getting up in these people's faces and rebutting them every step of the way. I've been out of it for a year and didn't even look at it. But when I came back within the last week, after hearing this about Bryan Kohberger, started looking at, looked up Viviana again because I always looked at her stuff previously and I respected her previously. She knows that. She's been at it. She's been at it. She's not letting them get away with their shit. Kudos to you, Viviana. You're a one tough chick. I respect you for that. Anyway, and she backs it up with evidence. She brings the receipts. She's right when she says that. She does. She brings the receipts. And she brings the receipts against Wickham. So as it turns out, when I brought this up, one of the things that that's what made me respond that it was 100,000 skin cells was someone on there saying it was only like 1,400 skin cells. So not 20 like Blum, but 1,400. It's like, nope, it's 100,000 skin cells. And of course, they just laughed at this because why? Well, because they don't do their homework, they don't do their research, they don't want to understand science. Now, I don't want to be political about this, folks. I'm apolitical. I don't like any politician, be it Donald Trump or Bill Clinton or Barack Obama. We're not going to find our way out of this morass right now through electoral politics any longer. It's well beyond that. The whole thing is owned lock, stock, and barrel, not by Israel, by the big corporations and the wealthy shareholders. Us little people, we don't have a say in the matter whatsoever. Okay, but this latest thing with Donald Trump and the vaccines and him saying they're tied to autism, it's just bullshit. It's absolutely bullshit. He's not a scientist, and he's making up lies, saying they put Coke bottles full of vaccine into children, and they have vats there that fill up the Coke bottles full of. It's insanity. And so I was watching a video about it today by Mika and Joe. I don't ever watch them. I don't watch the mainstream media any longer. I've stopped doing that years ago, but I don't watch them any longer. But I watched the video today because it came across the YouTube stream. And they're right. Scarborough says he has an autistic child. He's done all this research, and I have too. I researched this long ago. That Lance article was garbage. I mean, that was just absolutely, that study was in the Lance Journal was garbage. It was created by trial lawyers and funded by trial lawyers. Oh, for good reason. So there's just no connection with that. These vaccines that children have been taking have been incredibly beneficial. They've been so beneficial that everybody's just taking it for granted. But you won't be taking it for granted if ultimately they're phased out and children start dying. And I'm going to tell you right now what they've done and what he signed into law. Their children are going to start dying. So not only is this guy a pedophile rapist, but he's also going to be a murderer. He's going to murder children. And considering his stance on abortion, he wants to save children from being aborted so he can bring them into the world and murder them by making sure that they have a better chance of getting a life-ending illness early on because they're not vaccinated. And then, if they make it through that crucible, through that gauntlet, then, they can be preyed upon by all manner of pedophiles. Have you looked at the number of pedophiles that he pardoned as a result of January 6th? I mean, there's a number of them. You can't make this stuff up. Anyway, I'm not trying to be political there. I'm just saying I'm an equal opportunity critic of any politician. I don't care who it is. Barack Obama, Bill Clinton, like I said, George W. Bush, Donald Trump, equal opportunity critic. But my point here is that Donald Trump is anti-science, just as these Kohbergers, pro-burgers are. They are anti-science. They won't listen to the science. They will not listen to the science or the scientists. And I'm not saying science and scientists is without flaw. It's an institution, and anytime an institution gets underway and entrenched, it can have its share of corruption and misinformation and disinformation. Yes, all that can be there. But this is settled, all right? This related to the vaccinations, And I'm not talking about the COVID vaccinations. I'm talking about these other vaccinations that we all had. That science is settled. And this science is settled as well. This is just science. It's basic fact. Bryan Kohberger's skin cells were on that button snap, and it was the result of direct transfer, not indirect transfer. It was so prodigious, his skin cells on there. The button snap had upwards of 100,000 skin cells. And if you were to do your research, you would know why. But here's where me Julie's here. This is where me Jules here. This is where she me Julie's.
That information. No, the fuck it was not. You're out of
It was 100,000 skin cells, and she says, no, the fuck it was not.
your goddamn mind.
I'm out of my goddamn mind, she said. I'm out of my goddamn mind.
Out of your goddamn mind.
I'm out of my goddamn mind. Okay.
Well, Rasputin can go Putin himself somewhere.
Oh my God. I can go Putin myself somewhere. Well, I guess I'm doing that right now. I'm doing it right now.
I mean, just ignore the dumbasses. It's not very hard.
I'm a dumbass. Ignore the dumbasses.
I mean, it is kind of crazy. Like, they come in here.
So someone here says, I appreciate hearing people like Rasputin because then we know what the other side is thinking and can prepare proper rebuttal in court. It's like the soy just feeding us info. Okay. Okay.
There was stuff that's just like, yeah, you're not really convincing me.
No, I'm not trying to convince you. So by me putting that on there, there's no way I know I'm going to convince you. But if I could at least get 3 people who are watching you right there, maybe not commenting over here, but 3 people, let's say a handful of people, to at least think twice about it and to research, that's better than nothing. And that's what I'm trying to do.
Broski.
Broski. Okay.
You're not really convincing me, broski.
I mean, how could I convince you with just one comment? This is going to convince some people, though. I assure you this is going to convince some people. So why don't you just come up and say something? Saw someone was viewing this, all right? If you're viewing it, just pop in and ask a question. Come on, don't be shy. Pop in and ask a question. It's okay. Let's have a discussion here. Now, we can't have a discussion if you say, well, that might be true what you're presenting, but they're lying because law enforcement just lies. True, law enforcement does sometimes lie on occasion, and law enforcement is not immune to being corrupt. But that's not the case here. There's no way they're lying about this because they knew that this was going to be presented in a court of law, so they had to have this all buttoned up. So I don't believe this is a lie at all. Why would this be a lie? They had to have this buttoned up.
They also can never find when we're making shit up either. Like, you know what's so funny? There's like these.
The problem with guilters is they can't critically. Now I'm a guilter. Listen. I'm not a guilter. I want the truth here. Like, I want to know what really transpired that night from a narrative perspective, for example. And I want Bryan Kohberger to tell us. I want him to tell us. He's the guilter. Call him the guilter. He pled guilty. He's a guilter, all right? He's the traitor. Ann Taylor and Cy Ray aren't the traitors. Bryan Kohberger's the traitor to your cause. He pled guilty. Talk to him. Not to me. Quit calling me a guilter. I actually want the truth of the matter. I don't think law enforcement's narrative is buttoned up. And I don't blame them. I mean, sans Bryan Kohberger telling us, for example, what exact route did he take from his apartment to Moscow that night, we don't have the full truth yet. I mean, if that is indeed his car on passing Floyd's cannabis shop, and that's certainly within the realm of reason. I'm going to do another video showing you that makes sense. Okay, it does make sense. I'm going to show you where it makes sense. The timing and everything makes sense. So that I think that very well may be his car. And Gray Hughes did a great job in his analysis showing that it's not fog lights, that the guardrail is splitting the light beam. So he did a great job showing that. So and it's a white car. It very well could be Bryan Kohberger's white Elantra. Now, the only question I have from there is, well, okay, what other video do you have showing him getting to Indian Trails? And if there's no other video showing him getting to Indian Trails, then how do you get to Indian Trails? Because there's not enough time there. I mean, too much time elapsed for him to just go straight from Floyd's Cannabis to Indian Trails without being picked and not being picked up by any camera either. But there's a time gap there. So to me, there's too much of a time gap. So what gives, and I would want to know from Bryan Kohberger, what was your route? What route did you take? We don't have to ask him what route he took on the way home because Cy Ray, and I believe Cy Ray on this, said GPS data exists. And actually, I believe Cy Ray on this, and I think that, believe it or not, Pavarotti may be right about this. When he switched that phone back on, and Cy Ray says they have the GPS data, why did they just use the GPS data to chart his course home from there? It's a good question, actually. Pavarotti said, I bet they have that GPS data because he activated the map because, he needed to know how to get home. VIA the map. He needed to know where he was. And so because it's the map, it's recording GPS data. Now, that very well may be so. The only question I would have there is if it's an app, usually that's a third-party app. So it's a third party. The third party would have the GPS and not necessarily AT&T unless it was an AT&T app. So if it's an AT&T app, okay, yes, AT&T would have that GPS information. But if it's not an AT&T app, would AT&T be recording that GPS data if it was a third-party app? I don't know. So, but that's actually a good theory on Pavarotti's part. Anyway, Cy Ray says they have the GPS data. AT&T, he specifically said AT&T had the GPS data. So it's either that mapping software or it's Bryan Kohberger has the family sharing app from AT&T on that, which would have his geolocation data all the time. But if it had that, it certainly would have showed him at his apartment at 2:54 when he powered down the phone. The GPS data shortly before that would have showed that, so you wouldn't have to rely on the cell tower for that. You would have just had the GPS data, yet they rely, even Cy Ray just relies on the cell tower data for that versus GPS data. And you think that if he had been in the house or around the house previously, and Cy Ray says he now believes that the triangulation data that, or the longitudinal, latitudinal guess positioning of Bryan Kohberger's phone per the AT&T data, based on the cell tower that it was hitting at the time and the signal strength, I guess, puts him, within 25 meters of the home or a range, 25 meters, 100 meters of the home, whatever the case is, that he now considers that accurate. So he was in proximity to the home. Well, if he had family sharing, why wouldn't you have the GPS data for that too, right? Because that would have put you in the home if he was in the home. So why would there be GPS data? AT&T have GPS data at 4:48 a.m. south of Moscow, starting at 4:48 a.m. all the way through when he goes home. But why wouldn't it have it any other time? I don't know. So that seems odd to me. But anyway, now I lost track of where I was there. But I'm sorry, but I'm not a guilter. Bryan Kohberger is. I'm not. He pled guilty. I'm just taking the man at his word. If he pled guilty, then here's the conundrum for you all who continue to advocate for his innocence. If he pled guilty and lied, like he said in his post-conviction relief document, he lied. He lied under oath. Okay. Now he said he was coerced to lie, but he knew he was lying. He agreed that he would lie because it would be a win, so to speak, for him. So he agreed to lie. Well, that makes him a liar. So if he's lying about that, how do I know he's not lying then when he says he's innocent now? Where do we draw the line on what he's lying about and what he's not lying about? He's a proven liar. By virtue of his post-conviction relief document, he's proven himself to be a liar. He lied and he perjured himself. He lied under oath. So he's a liar. Well, I'm going to tell you right now, I don't like liars. I don't trust liars. I don't trust drug addicts. And drug addicts are liars. Amongst many other things, they're psychopaths, many of them, in my opinion. They learn to be psychopaths. It's a learned behavior. They become psychopaths to feed their addiction. They cross the Rubicon in that regard. In my mind, psychologically, if you cross that Rubicon and you become a psychopath and engage in psychopathic behavior, you've crossed the Rubicon. What it means when you cross the Rubicon is there's no going back. You've broke bad, so to speak. You can't come back from that. You are forever in that new land. And so he's a drug addict, plus he's a proven liar now. I don't trust that. That's double indemnity against him. I don't trust that. And that's before considering all the evidence. So I'm not the guilter. Your homeboy is. He's the guilter.
Groups on Facebook that I've been ignoring like the plague over the past few years, but over the past couple of weeks I've gotten into them just to for funsies. And it's really ridiculous how many of them say that I'm crazy and all I do is make up stuff and lie and blah 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 blah. But when I tell them to run and fetch, they can never bring me anything that I made up a story of.
Okay, you've made up a story. You've made up a story. You're saying that, and you keep pushing it with your audience, and this is despicable. You're not helping Bryan Kohberger at all if you believe he's innocent. You're not. You are not helping him at all. You're actually hindering him if you think he's innocent. I'm going to bring it to you. Well, you know what? I'm not going to bring it to you. I am going to rebut you. Not that I think that I would ever persuade you. I'm not going to persuade you, ma'am. I cannot persuade you. You are unpersuadable. You're like Donald Trump with the vaccine thing. You're just anti-science. So here it is. First of all, they do not understand units of measurement. Okay? They just don't get it. So when they see, oh my gosh, look, it's only 0.168 ng/UL. They don't know what any of this means, many of them. They don't know ng means means nanograms. They don't know what a nanogram is versus a picogram. They don't know what any of that means in regards to skin cells. They just see 0.168. Oh my God, that's so small. Look how look at that. It's small. They expect people to believe, but that is crazy. They're just liars. It's the same old story. It's lie. You can't reason with people like that. You can't. They are anti-science. They literally are in the Stone Age and happy to be. But this is the science. So this person had the temerity to throw this out on the Idaho 4 subreddit, which is, if you want to talk about guilters, these people were guilters from the very beginning. I mean, they never gave Bryan Kohberger the benefit of the doubt whatsoever. They didn't even give him the benefit of the doubt. Now, that's not to say you just throw all babies out with the bathwater and say, oh, they're guilters, so I never listen to what they say. Consider, keep an open mind. I kept an open mind then. I'm keeping an open mind now. I'm keeping an open mind. If you can prove to me that Bryan Kohberger is innocent, I'm keeping an open mind. I have not seen anything yet, especially from you, Jules. I haven't seen it from Lana either. I've seen nothing yet. I could actually produce right now some inconsistencies I have seen make a better case than you are right now. I'm withholding it right now. I'm going to talk about it later, not because it makes me think that Bryan Kohberger is innocent. It's just because, once again, this is my claim, and I'm going to continue to claim it. Until you have absolutely full transparency, and that includes Bryan Kohberger coming clean, we're never going to fully understand this. And when you can't fully understand it because you don't have full transparency, you make shit up to try to fill in that gap. And it's easy to claim conspiracies, and it's easy to claim it's something else because you do not have that full information. Understand that mechanism. Into the breach step people like my good friend and colleague, Pavarotti, who's making a mint off of this. because of that breach, into that gap, that information gap. So this person submits this to the guilters, and they get chewed up, but they get chewed up properly, as they should. As they should. So this is from Rylene Nallon. As we remember, this is actually a defense document, but they're, quoting Rylene Nallon here. And it says, on February 17, 2025, the state produced a second round of disclosures, including one from Rylene Nallon. As with the first disclosure, the focus of this second disclosure is touch contact DNA and direct versus indirect transfer. Although conceding that currently DNA technology cannot conclusively answer the question, the state offers the following opinion. Many complicated factors can influence the likelihood of transfer of DNA and the persistence of the transferred DNA after deposition. Current DNA technology cannot conclusively answer the question of when DNA was deposited on an item or by what mechanism, direct or indirect transfer. It is possible the DNA detected on M2022-4843 item 1.1 resulted from secondary transfer. However, based on Nallon's training and experience, it is her opinion, given the quantity of the DNA detected on M2022-4843 item 1.1, quantity being 0.16 nanograms per UL, and that's the solution, the UL, and given the DNA profile obtained is single source, it is more likely the result of direct transfer. And this is from her training and her experience. Then when you get such a prodigious sample, as will be described in a second, when you get such a prodigious sample and you couple that with single source, it's a good bet because it's always been the case for them with all the other testing they've ever done related to transferred DNA. It's always been the case with them that it is as a result of direct transfer. Yes. Is it 100% conclusive? No. Directionally, is it spot on? Yes. And I would say directionally, that's 90% directionally. It's good, folks. You can safely say this was transferred by Bryan Kohberger himself, but it gets better. It gets better. But they always have an answer for it. The Kohbergers always have an answer. And this is what I say, you can't argue with these cult members because they will just always change the goalposts. You can beat them in an argument, like I'm going to beat them in this argument, but they're going to change the goalposts. And it's just one more way they change the goalposts. And I'll show you in a second. So this person says, touch DNA sample concentration from the sheath is 0.168 nanograms per, is it uliliter? Well, anyway, UL, as stated by Nallon from ISP Lab. 0.168 nanograms per UL is on the low end. Optimal amount is 1 ng per UL and above. Common thresholds for forensic DNA analysis, like STR profiling, range from 0.5 ng per UL to 1 ngl per UL to 10 ng per UL or higher. Concentrations below 1 ng per UL are usable but subject to degraded, less reliable results or poor amplification. Such low concentrations require amplification, PCR, or highly sensitive concentration techniques. So we can do away with the theory it was a robust profile. This person's about to get their ass handed to them. And then this person, Pizza Made Me Fat, said, and yet the quantity of DNA leads them to believe it was direct transfer, i.e. Bryan likely touched the sheath himself, yet you aren't quick to highlight that bit. And so this person, Zodiac, says, of course she'd say that. She wouldn't be a state witness if she entertained the possibility of a secondary transfer. That's her opinion. Experts can have differing opinions. That's true. There's nothing wrong with that. But here comes the science. Repulsive Dot, thank you. Repulsive Dot says, if she entertained the possibility of a secondary transfer. And so the Repulsive says, usually secondary transfer requires a second person, right? What data or evidence would Nallen or any other expert base secondary transfer on with regard to the single source sheath DNA profile? And then there was a comment here and the person removed it. So then Repulsive dives into the science. Such low concentrations require amplification, PCR. Now remember, amplification is done for STR purposes, short tandem repeat purposes, not for SNP purposes, okay? It's only for STR. So this person says, all STR profiling utilizes PCR amplification, regardless of the concentrations, irrespective of concentration. Your starting point is wholly incorrect. So this person's wrong right out of the gate, and they're proving they're not scientific because they didn't understand that. You also fail to understand some very basic concepts, such as mass versus concentration and concentration of solutions. The National Institutes of Standards and Technology cite it in some of the defense filings on DNA evidence you linked, but obviously they didn't read it, recommended 0.5 nanograms per 25 UL as lower end of optimal concentration for STR profiling kits. Note, per 25 UL, not per 1 UL, as concentrated quoted for the sheath DNA, i.e. 0.168 nanograms per 1 UL. STR test kits are sold for varying optimal concentrations. The ISP lab utilizes Promega. Promega and other brands have STR test kits optimized for DNA concentrations of 4 nanograms per 25 UL concentration, which is pretty much exactly what the concentration is here. There are also commercial test kits which can produce reliable profiles from DNA concentrations orders of magnitude lower than the 0.18 nanogram UL 1 per 1 UL as referenced here. So, the stated DNA concentration here is good. It is in the median recommended range for some commonly used commercial STR kits. And folks, no scientist is going to argue with this that is in this field. They're going to say, yep, 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 yep. You're not going to get a scientist on the stand on behalf of the defense to rebut this. And the defense never planned on it because they accepted it. In their own words, they accepted it. This person shows. Promega and other brands have STR kits optimized for DNA concentrations of 4 nanograms per 25 UL, which is pretty much exactly what the concentration is here. There are commercial, okay, never mind. So the stated DNA concentration here is good, is in the median recommended range for some commonly used commercial STR kits. Further, the quantity and quality of DNA here was robust enough to generate at least 2 different profile types, meaning STR versus SNP, SNP being the Othram analysis, what was used for the Othram analysis. Further, the quantity and quality of DNA here was robust enough to generate at least 2 different profile types, both complete from 2 different labs. The ISP lab for the STR and the SNP, the Othram lab for SNP. These profiles were then used in 4 different comparative processes, which all matched to Kohberger VIA direct comparison with cheek swab, VIA identification of his father as the father of the sheath DNA donor, and VIA, the SNP, IgG family tree mapping. And then this person said, now you have to understand, this person corrected their post after this because repulsive dot corrects them. So I'll tell you what they said initially here with this number. To be clear, I don't know what the F I'm reading here, but isn't the DNA here actually slightly too concentrated? And then they say 0.168 nanograms per 1 euloliter equals 4.2 nanograms per 1 euloliter. So they had 1 euloliter here. It seems like their ideal range was 0.4 to 3.0, with 3 to 4, and he's saying 3 to 4 nanograms per 25 UL, also being good with some alleic imbalances, so not ideal. And then this is at 4.2. So you need to understand, so when you convert to the 25 UL, the 0.1, so if you do the conversion, 0.168 nanograms, Ng per UL, per 1 UL, is the equivalent of 4.2 nanograms, or Ng, per 25 UL, okay? So it's well within the range of optimal range for these test kits, okay? Well within the optimal range. So that's what this person's saying here, 4.2 Ng. They're saying they read somewhere where that's beyond optimal. Repulsive dot, once again, rebuts this and said there's really no beyond optimal. So it seems like their ideal range, so not ideal, and then this is at 4.2. So this person's argument is that 4.2 is too optimal and that you can get allelic imbalances when that happens. But this person, repulsive dot, rebuts that. And they say 4.2 nanograms per 25 UL. So he's correcting this person's thing here. They must have had 1 UL. Not 4.2 grams per 1 UL. Okay, so that person had 4.2 grams per 1 UL. Okay, so, and this person says, repulsive dot says, ideal range, and this person absolutely is a scientist, folks. They could not be speaking this way to it if they weren't. Because this is complex. This is well beyond the Stone Age hunter-gatherers like Jules and Lana and their crowd. Ideal range was per 25 UL, not per 1 UL. But yes, the sheath DNA concentration is above a level showing to give good profiles. So it's well within the range of optimal. The key points here are the concentration noted for the sheath is fine and within commonly used ranges. The concentration noted for the sheath has been demonstrated to give good profiles. Concentrations 10 times lower than that, get that, concentrations 10 times lower than that noted for the sheath are used without issue reliably. Scientists would agree with this. To some extent, the concentration noted isn't really a big issue as volume can be adjusted to increase the amount of DNA and isn't out of a viable range to start with. So what he's saying is there's really no over-optimal. All you have to do is change the concentration and expand the DNA. The ideal range by test kit type can be adjusted to DNA concentration with different kits supplied. The concentration noted for sheath DNA is within range for which commercial kits are supplied and validated to produce good profiles. The Kohbergers don't want to know about any of this. They don't care to know the science any more than Donald Trump cares to know the science about vaccines. Tried and true vaccines. So this person says, for the record, caught that and edited it to 25 before I got your response. Sure you did. But yeah, just kind of surprised that they had higher concentration then that study even used at the top end? And then this person responds to that and says, Repulsive Dot says, yes, some commercial kits go 10 times lower than these concentrations. Studies show successful profiles at 100 times lower concentrations. Too high is easily diluted to fit optimal range of a kit. So once again, you can never have too optimal. And then people are saying very interesting. Okay, so what does this say about skin cells? Well, you got to convert this to skin cells. And so that was done here too. By Repulsive Dot once again. Thank you, Repulsive Dot. So Repulsive Dot submits this thread to the Idaho 4 subreddit. They're guilters now. Why would you believe anything they did? Because I don't believe in throwing babies out with the bathwater. Yes, are there any number of guilter trolls on this subreddit as there were always everywhere? Yes. Many of them are trolls and they're just out to chastise. But some of these people are not trolls and they come with the receipts. And Repulsive Dot comes with the receipts, comes with the science. You have to be open-minded. You cannot grow as a person if you do not think critically. You told me that I don't think critically, that guilters don't think critically. You labeled me a guilter and said that I don't think critically. I'm thinking critically here. You're not. If you believe what Jules is telling you about Bryan Kohberger's skin cells on the button snap of that sheath, then you're not thinking critically, you're not open-minded, and you're not open to truth. You can't claim to be a truth seeker if you have a closed mind and you don't think critically, and instead accuse others of doing the same when they're doing the opposite. So Repulsive Dot here says there was significant amount of Kohberger's skin and DNA on the sheath. An often repeated but completely unsupported claim here is that the sheath DNA profile was generated from just a few of Kohberger's skin cells. 20 skin cells is sometimes claimed. Yes, and that was Blum. I fell prey to it. Many other people fell prey to it too. Someone points it out to them here. They say this claim may originate with Howard Blum. He said this in the first or second installment of his series in Airmail. Yep, absolutely he did. So the actual amount was around 56,000 skin cells, or DNA equivalent to that number of cells. So remember, you can have a number of DNA strands, I suppose, whatever you would call them, within a skin cell. And I think that's someone said. I don't know what someone said. It's 6. So whatever the case may be, but this is known from the concentration of the extracted DNA solution and the extraction protocol. Now that's just in the extraction, folks. So 56,000 is the amount of skin cells extracted, or the equivalent DNA that 56,000 skin cells equates to. So we're just talking about the extraction, not the total amount that would have been on the button snap. Remember, you cannot extract everything that's on the button snap. It's just that the extraction methods are not good enough to get everything. So some's left behind, and those numbers vary, and they have those numbers, and they can vary within a range, and sometimes they can only get half of it. The DNA concentration in the extraction solution was stated as this is the science, 0.168 nanograms per 1 UL. The ISP uses Promega DNA test kits, as we learned in the last Reddit subreddit, from Repulsive Dot. And the standard protocol and volume of DNA extraction solution for processing swabs uses 1 milliliter of extraction buffer per swab. Total DNA extracted is calculated equals 168,000 picograms. There are 6 picograms of human DNA per human somatic cell. So this is DNA equivalent to 28,000 somatic cells. 100,000 or 100 to 250 picograms of DNA is considered the lower threshold for STR DNA sequencing. So the quantity here is hundreds of orders of magnitude higher and in no way nominal, borderline, or near the lower threshold. Understand that? This is simple science, units and measures. Get your units of measurements right. So here he speaks to the extraction efficiency. The extraction efficiency of DNA swabbing is detailed in the literature at approximately 47%. And efficiency of extraction from swabs is approximately 85%. So are you getting that? This is confusing. So what they're saying is the extraction efficiency of DNA swabbing is detailed in the literature at approximately 47%. So what they're saying is when you go to swab an evidence item, what you get is approximately 47% of what is there. It's just the way it shakes out. They know this because they've measured it all along. You're only going to get 47% of approximately, on average, 47% of what is there. Okay, and then it's saying, then the efficiency of the transfer of the extraction from that swab that you just swabbed the DNA evidence with, the extraction from that swab to get it into your, into your test tube or whatever medium you're using to analyze the sample, you have to get it from the swab to that extraction, or that extraction from that swab is 85%. So you get even more diminishment from originally what was on the evidence item. 47% and then 15% of that 47%. I'm sorry, 85% of that 47% then only gets extracted, not the full 100%. So by virtue of this, so this person says, by virtue of this, so the actual number of cells actually present on the swab was significantly greater than 60,000. Even if significantly greater. So think about that. This is where could be upwards of 100,000 skin cells. Significantly greater. 100,000 is significantly greater than 60,000. It could be upward of 100,000 skin cells. Here it says, even if we assumed the lowest extraction buffer volume of 250 UL, sometimes used for semen or blood samples, this would equate to greater than 14,000 cells, or equivalent DNA quantity. As the swab, of course, did not extract 100% of the cells from the sheath snap surface, the 56,000 cells is a low estimate for quantity of cells present on the sheath itself. As the majority of shed skin cells do not have nuclear DNA, skin cells lose their nuclear DNA as they age to form the callous, dead external layer that is sloughed off, the actual number of cells would also be much higher than estimated here to yield this quantity of DNA. So it's even higher yet because of this, on top of the whole extraction thing. So it's even higher yet because of that. 100,000 skin cells might actually be an underestimate, in fact, considering that. Because not all the skin cells would render DNA. As a matter of fact, not all the skin cells do render DNA. Touch DNA can often contain sweat, sebum, and other bodily fluids as carriers of the DNA in and from various cell types, along with shed skin cells. The defense motion in limine to restrict use of terms touch and contact DNA gives the impression that the quantity and quality of the sheath snap DNA supports direct transfer of the DNA. Just as the defense DNA expert opinion made clear, so what they're saying here is the defense agrees to this. The defense is not arguing this. They actually concede this and agree to it. And I'm going to tell you how they changed the goalposts, the Kohbergers, the cult, the dark, malevolent Hare Krishnas. Hare Krishnas are nice people. They're loving, nice people. But the Kohbergers are the dark, malevolent version of the Hare Krishnas. And Bryan Kohberger, per my little music video I made there, is their sweet Lord. Just as a defense DNA expert opinion made clear, the sheath DNA profile is robust. It is abundantly clear that this was not a few skin cells. I'm bringing it right to you, Jules. I'm not doing it to persuade you. I know I would never persuade you or anyone else at your venue that is a member or is a substantial contributor. But I know that this will persuade some who are watching, who are on the fence, don't know, they just come to it. It's going to persuade some of them. If it's 5 or 10 or even 1, that's a good thing. And so here, we see right here, they provide the documentation, repulsive dot. So it says here, on the contrary, the defense has disclosed that its forensic biology and DNA expert will testify that there is good support that Mr. Kohberger's DNA was found on item 1.1, a swab from the knife sheath. So they're not going to concede that if it was just a few skin cells, folks. They never argued it. And this is one of the reasons that I leaned heavily into guilt at the end there. Everything the defense was doing, it was like they were holding up a sign, guilty. And some people were very pleased that this person gave them this breakdown. So this person said, thank you for this amazing breakdown. And I say thank you as well, repulsive dot. The snaps on those sheaths are very hard to open when they're new. I'm guessing he may have unsnapped it before putting his gloves on and entering. It would keep him from tearing his glove. Being hard to open, it peeled off a substantial amount of skin cells as his thumb rolled against it. Well, it could either be that, or he opened and closed it any number of times, or, as my title says, Bryan Kohberger is quite the shedder. Remember, we learned some people just shed DNA like it's nobody's business. Bryan Kohberger could be one of those people. And so repulsive dot said this person, very possible. That is one strong option. Another is that he cleaned it before the crime, but not the metal indent of the snap, which had accumulated skin, sebum from multiple touches, like I was saying. Or my pet theory, His knowledge of DNA transfer was academic, and he lacked practical experience of sterile technique. He put on gloves, but contaminated one or both by touching his face, edge of mouth, nose, saliva, sebum, putting on the mask, and or touching something with high loading of his DNA, such as the steering wheel when exiting the car. He then opened the snap over the glove. Well, this person contradicts himself there, because that becomes indirect transfer from the steering wheel. So that's indirect transfer. Once it transfers to one item and then to another, that kind of becomes an indirect transfer. It has to be directly from the item to the person. In other words, he has to have touched himself in real time. The body in real time had to have come in contact with that knife sheath. So this is where that person says, 20 skin cells is sometimes claimed. They claim the Howard Blum. So this person said, would the lab have been able to delineate the difference between saliva and skin cells? And Repulsive Dot says, no, the snap was not tested for body fluid antigens. Touch DNA or trace DNA is just shorthand for DNA from cell types that were not defined. The majority component of touch DNA, as the carrier of DNA, is most often sebum, sweat, tears, mucus, carrying cells, and DNA from cells of varying kinds. So he might indeed have opened it with his mouth or touched a gloved hand to his mouth before opening it. This person's Repulsive Dot is trying to provide explanations as to why there would have been such a prodigious amount, why it would have been such a robust sample. And so one of the things he's saying, well, even if he was wearing gloves, he could have, like he said, touched his mouth or something like that and gotten it all over, and then immediately touched his the knife thereafter. So that's really not indirect transfer, because it's almost happening in real time. So this is interesting. They're talking about, the possibility of indirect. So great breakdown, indirect transfer. You answered my one question about threshold levels and how much DNA would be considered significant. Out of the question to be anyone's DNA other than BK's. One other question, maybe you might know. In testing of the DNA, can forensics also nail the most accurate age of the DNA on that snap? How many hours old do they believe was the DNA? I'm trying to guesstimate BK's alibi in correlation with the age of the DNA. Driving around for hours that night could make it difficult for planted DNA to be very young. It would need to be older, I'm thinking, because the planters would have needed BK to be somewhere they could access his young DNA. Just wondering how prosecution will argue against the planted sheath. And so Repulsive Dot says, at least answers, can forensics also nail the most accurate age of the DNA on that snap? No, the age of the DNA can't be determined. Even degraded DNA, while time would be obvious and a major factor, could also be degraded by light, microorganisms, heat, etc. So there's too many mitigating influences. In this case, the complete profile, so they got a complete profile, tends to point to younger, but not conclusive, meaning the older a sample, the more degraded it's going to be and the lesser chance you have of getting a complete profile. So the fact that they easily got a complete profile here and this sample, extracted sample was optimal, lends itself to the notion that it was a young sample. In other words, the DNA wasn't on there for a long time. So he said, but he caveats it. He said, in this case, the complete profile tends to point to younger, but that's not conclusive. BK's alibi, the single source, and complete profile largely rules out secondary transfer. That does not involve very elaborate framing, planting of DNA in the sheath. Secondary transfer for a complete profile would have a 5-hour maximum window, assuming idealized perfect conditions, e.g. lengthy handshake, no hand washing or activity with manual friction before touching the object. Kohberger claiming to be alone for 5+ hours before rules this out, along with absence of secondary profile. So good, he provides additional reasoning as to why this could not have been planted. Because you have a 5-hour window here before the DNA is just too degraded because of secondary transfer, and you would not get a complete profile. So they speak to here, touch transfer DNA gets marginalized by defense attorneys, but it's much more than just shed skin cells. So this person says, thank you, Dot. Clever to calculate the DNA extract solution used to determine the estimated number of cells found in the sheath. I have a question. It's not just clever, it's intelligent. Clever sometimes has a stigma attached to it as you're being, deceptive. There's no deception here. This is all straightforward. It's intelligent and scientific. I have a question. Because the evidence of the sample being robust, as you have proven, are you concluding it was most likely not skin cells, but sweat, spit, sebum, or other bodily fluids as described? Will the prosecution expert most likely testify to this in your opinion? Edit to add, will that make the state's case stronger if it was from sweat or some other fluids? The defense can still argue against a direct transfer. There has been a historical assumption that touched DNA was just or mainly shed skin cells. More recent and comprehensive studies suggest that sweat, sebum, mucus, and other body fluids are the major carriers of DNA in touch samples, and that the DNA is from a variety of cell types. Think about how often your hands touch your nose, lips, mouth, rub eyes, hair, etc. This is why this person was thinking that it was it's a young sample and that it was Bryan Kohberger recently touching his mouth or or his nose, and then the button, and then the snap on the sheath with his gloves, by the way. Or he had gloves on in the car because he said steering wheels contain the same bodily fluids, and they hold onto them well, steering wheels, for whatever reason. So if he had his gloves on that and then touched the sheath after, it would be the same difference. So actually, it's a good theory on his part. Their part. The high quantity and quality of the DNA here is suggestive of direct transfer. Quantity also suggests more than a casual, brief handling of the sheath, and fluid like sebum helping to carry a significant loading of DNA onto the snap. Oh, this person addresses the brass. I am confused because DNA disintegrates on brass after 12 hours. So how is so much present on the snap? And then this person, Repulsive Dot, says, I did 2 posts a year ago and 2 years ago on that specifically. Here's one. DNA does not disintegrate in 12 hours on brass, but rather the amount recovered reduced. There can be accelerated oxidation and or some interference with enzymes used in profiling. Notable, the study showing biggest effect was done using a deposited solution of DNA that had no body fluids. DNA, of course, needs to be in contact with the metal for an effect. Mucus and a significant deposit of Schloff cells, as we seem to have on the sheath here, would mean not all DNA was... This is a great explanation. Clopenny, if you're listening, here's the explanation. The skin cells here, whilst are not good carriers of DNA, could have helped provide a buffer between the brass and the cells that in fact were good carriers of DNA, which were the bodily fluids, thus protecting that DNA from the brass. How about that? That's a great explanation, actually. Would mean not all DNA was contacting the surface or the metal. Hydrophobic material like sebum would be a barrier also because the DNA is in the fluid itself, so that fluid is also protecting. So you have a double protection here perhaps against the metal, both to protect some of the deposit from contact with the metal and inhibiting any effects of a solution. Notable, the snap metal composition has, I think, never been confirmed, only the knife itself. No, the snap was confirmed as being brass, so that was confirmed. The key takeout would be if there was any significant effect from the snap metal, that points to a short time window between the DNA being deposited and the sheath being processed by forensics, i.e. Kohberger touched it shortly before the murders. So what he's saying here, considering the buffers that he mentioned, and they're only going to last so long, but it will extend the period of time that brass will degrade this DNA, that it lends itself to this being a very young sample, and much more to the point of because it was able to generate a complete profile and it was within an optimal range for a sample. So it was a prodigious sample, a robust sample. So in order to get that, it would have to have been young. This is more proof that it had to be young, meaning it had to have been deposited, within hours before the massacre. And per Bryan Kohberger's alibi, he was alone. So there you have it. There you have it. That's critically thinking. That's science. This was a robust sample. No doubt about it. 100,000 skin cells may be an underestimate. Bryan Kohberger touched this knife sheath within hours before the massacre directly. It was his bodily fluids directly to the knife sheath and his skin cells directly to this knife sheath snap, not somebody else's. It's single source. It had to be a young sample that was extracted for it to be so optimal and to be able to generate complete optimal profiles from it. 1,400 skin cells, 20 skin cells. Come on. Come on. Do you think Nowlin is going to lie about this and the ISP is going to lie about this? Do you think that the FBI got involved because they want to frame Bryan Kohberger? Come on, folks. That makes no sense. Why? Why would they want to frame Bryan Kohberger? That's always been nuts. And, you know, as far as anybody else framing him, tell us how, Bryan Kohberger. If you thought you were framed, tell us how. Produce. Now, what I'm going to tell you, what these folks are going to do here, you know, that how the defense conceded that this was a robust sample. Now, some people are going to say, oh, this doesn't mean that they said it was a robust sample. Yes, it does. Otherwise, they would contend there's no way that they by them saying this, they accept that it was a complete profile. And in order to have a complete profile, not just one profile, they used two different methods. So they were able to use this extraction any number of times. So inherent in that is, and implied by that is that this was a robust sample. But what the Kohbergers will say, they'll move the goalpost and say, well, it was ineffectiveness of counsel. Bryan Kohberger said he had ineffective counsel. Bryan Kohberger said he had ineffective counsel only in respect to the items he listed, not overall ineffective counsel, only to the things he listed in regard to him accepting the plea deal. Not this. He didn't mention anything about this and this being ineffectiveness of counsel. He was right there when they were going over this. He was privy to it. He didn't raise an objection then and say, hey, ineffectiveness of counsel. No, instead he accepted a plea deal. Now, he claims he was coerced to accept a plea deal based on promises and things said, but that's not this. This was already covered. This was already covered, and he was good with this. He accepted this. This part was not ineffectiveness of counsel. He accepted this himself. He accepted it. He didn't rebut this. They weren't going to rebut it. So once again, this is the state's response. They say, on the contrary, the defense has disclosed that its forensic biology and DNA expert will testify that there is good support that Mr. Kohberger's DNA was found on item 1.1. A swab from the knife sheath. Now, I'm sure some people here would say, well, they look at what they're saying there. They're saying it's on a swab from the knife sheath, but they're not saying it was on the knife sheath. They're just saying somehow it got on the swab that allegedly came from the knife sheath. Come on, people. Will you come on? Come on. Where do you think the swab came from? What would the defense argue there that it came from otherwise, the swab? From Bryan Kohberger's cheek? They called him into the lab and said, hey, look, can you open your mouth? Let me get this swab in there and get a good sample here. Come on. Come on. You're not going to win this case making claims like that. No, this is the last gasp by Bryan Kohberger. It's not going to work. And then it'll be it for him, and he will be in for good. That's the way it's going to roll, folks. But like I said, I think he probably seems like the type to me that will ultimately off himself in the next year or two, because he won't be able to take it. He'll go cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs. Anyway. So it looks like it got 3 views, but nobody ever dropped in. Sad to see that. I had the chat open in case anybody went to chat, but that's all right. That's okay. See you, Jules. It was nice discussing this with you. Okay, it was really nice discussing this with you. See you, Lana. was nice discussing this with you and your crowd. I'm glad that I could school you, that you finally get it. Nobody ever answered me, I'm sure, here. Nope, they're willing to accept a monster to help defend a monster. So they will embrace any monster. Kind of sickening. I'm guessing they deleted my question right here. Let's see. Yeah, these people are, they're not curious. Look at this person's bragging about this. So he's bragging about him being on the FBI team in Waco that burned down that compound and killed a bunch of people, innocent people, and children, 23 children, by the way. He's bragging about this. Wow, this guy's a real go-getter. Yeah, he's a real go-getter. What a warrior. What a warrior. I'd say look at the dead eyes. The eyes tell it all. Those are dead eyes. And then he thinks he's such a stud. He's got the tattoos up and down his arms. Ooh, I better be careful. I don't want to get sniped. Don't snipe me, Chris. Whatever you do, please don't snipe me. Anyway, that is it for now, folks. Take care. The chat was great today. Thank you for everybody dropping in and chatting. And like I said, it looked like we got 3 views. Woo! And some people sat here for half an hour and listened to it all. But no one bothered to drop in. I can take a guess of who that was. Yes, you. Yes, you. I know who you are. I know who you are. Anyway, take care, everybody. Bye.